Today we are looking at the question, should people have the right to die? Okay, and in order to understand this question, we need to look at our definition and different forms and different types of euthanasia. Firstly, euthanasia is killing someone painlessly and with compassion to end their suffering. This word means a good or gentle death. Euthanasia comes in two forms. Passive euthanasia is when you withhold the medical treatment that someone needs, and as a result they die. Can you think what maybe active euthanasia is? Fantastic if you got that right. So passive euthanasia is allowing a terminally ill or incurably ill person to die by withdrawing or withholding medical treatment. And active euthanasia is the taking of a deliberate step to end a person's life. So it could be giving a lethal injection. We now need to look at the different types of active euthanasia. Our first type is called voluntary. The ill person asks for their life to be ended as they don't want to live anymore. They volunteer to end their life. The second type of active euthanasia is called non-voluntary. And this is when an ill person is unable to express a choice. For example, a baby might not be able to say, I would like euthanasia, or a person in a coma can't wake up to suddenly say, I would like to have euthanasia. The third type is called involuntary euthanasia. This is, for example, when an ill person is capable of expressing a choice, but is not given the opportunity to do so. This is often seen as murder. These are our three types of euthanasia.
Pros of euthanasia. Sometimes people mention in their wills that if they ever get into such a situation where it seems hopeless or too much to bear, that the family should allow him/her to die. An individual should have the liberty to choose induced death if he is suffering from an incurable disease where even the best treatment doesn't improve his quality of life. Legalizing euthanasia would help alleviate suffering in terminally ill patients. It would be inhuman and unfair to make them endure the unbearable pain. While killing someone in an attempt to defend self is acceptable by law, mercy killing is seen as an act that is highly immoral in nature. The motive of euthanasia is to aid in dying painlessly and thus should be considered positively by the lawmakers. A doctor is expected to help treat the sick by prescribing medicines that will relieve the patient's suffering at any cost, even if the medications potentially give rise to serious side effects. This means dealing with distress should be the priority even if it affects one's life expectancy. Euthanasia follows the same theory of dealing with torment in a way that it helps one die peacefully out of possible peril. Euthanasia should be a natural extension of patient's rights, allowing him to decide the value of life and death. Maintaining life support system against the patient's wish is considered unethical by law as well as medical philosophy. If the patient has the right to discontinue treatment, why would he not have the right to shorten his lifetime to escape the anguish? Isn't the pain of waiting for death more traumatic? Healthcare expenditure is and will always be a concern for the family irrespective of the euthanasia laws, and only those who can afford a prolonged unproductive treatment will continue to do so. A section of those in support of mercy killing often ask whether it is rational to keep a person who has no hopes of survival alive on a support system when our medical infrastructure is already under immense pressure. It can thus be inferred that though euthanasia is banned worldwide,
to die bad deaths.
Is it a fear of, there's something, and I guess so deeply antithetical to the human condition, about knowing when you're going to die and planning for it? And I think, is that what you think the resistance comes from?
Oh, look, I think the resistance comes from many places. For some people, it's a core religious thing. Only God can giveth and taketh away life, and I understand that, and people are entitled to that belief. But because there is no greater primal fear than that of death, I think emotions sometimes overrule logic in this situation. You know, people that oppose these laws love to use the word killing. Oh, we're killing people. But these are people who are dying. And what we're trying to do with these laws is offer them, if they're faced with a terrible disease that can't be helped by medical science, we're offering them the choice, their choice, to take some control of that and not die that terrible death.
To go horribly or to go.
That's right.
Spent a lot of time thinking about this topic and trying to understand it from an opposing perspective. And the focal point for advocates seems to be the reduction of suffering. You may think that people in their final hours are needlessly suffering, and since death is inevitable, why withhold it from them? In some conversations I've had, it was described as cruel to force someone in that situation to suffer by withholding death from them. But that's a complete misrepresentation of what's happening. Notice the language that's being used here. Forcing someone or something is a description of what someone is doing. If we say that you are forcing someone to suffer, then we are implying that your actions are the cause of that suffering, when in fact, the suffering that occurs at death is a natural and inevitable part of that process. You might argue that if you see someone suffering, you have an obligation to relieve that suffering if you can, and I would agree with that. If I see someone starving, then I have an obligation to do something about that if I have the means to do it. But what if I don't? What if I can't relieve their hunger? Would it then be okay for me to kill them, since that would put an end to their suffering? Even if they ask me to kill them and I refuse, it's still fallacious to claim that I am forcing them to suffer or that I'm the cause of their suffering. And what about the moral misgivings of healthcare providers? If we normalize the practice of prematurely killing people, then this is something that they are going to have to get accustomed to. What about the psychological and moral stress that would be caused to them by injecting people with lethal amounts of poison as part of their workday? I doubt any one of us would appreciate the government stepping in one day and changing our job description to include suicidal collaboration. When we say it's our right to die when we please, we seem to be forgetting that this so-called right is contingent upon the actions of others, in this case doctors and nurses. If we say that it's our right, then any refusal on their part is actually a violation of our human rights. It used to be that our human rights were based on what people weren't allowed to do to us. But now, out of some perverse sense of entitlement, we seem to think that our human rights are based on what people must do for us. I don't believe in any human right that forces someone else to serve my wishes whether they want to or not.